Well, good afternoon, everybody. It's 2 o'clock, and I think we're ready to get started. So, thank you so much for joining our webinar today for seasonal employers and hiring. We're going to go through definitions, a labor law threshold, hiring strategies, and onboarding best practices as we prepare for our summer in Maine. I'm Jeff Burnham. I'm the sales manager here at Paper Trails. Most of you are used to hearing Chris Clough's voice. Chris is on a well-deserved vacation this week. We are joined today by Marcus Jaynes. Marcus is the owner and senior attorney at Landis Arn Jaynes. I will say, I guess I'll say this, Marcus, you are an expert in the world of immigration and having foreign workers come here. So thank you so much for joining us today, and we're going to appreciate your expertise.
Happy to be here. Thank you,
Awesome.
Jeff.
Yes. So today, just a little bit of housekeeping to start with. If you have questions, please pop them right up into the Q&A. We are recording this webinar, and yes, it will be posted, and yes, the presentation will be made available to everyone as well. Our iSolved users, so for Paper Trails clients, we're going to reference some iSolved tools throughout here. So, if you're already using the platform, great, a lot of it's there. Anything I say to you today is not to be considered legal advice. Always consult your employment attorney for guidance and specific to your situation. And just a quick tip, if you have questions specific to your business, you can always reach out to us, and you can always reach out to Marcus after the session is over. So, things we're going to cover today. What's a seasonal employer, foreign worker compliance, one big beautiful bill impacts, tips for hiring and onboarding. We're going to go through tipped employee laws because, yes, there's a lot to be done there. Compliance topics, labor laws for seasonal staff, tipped credit and wages, and the wonderful world of DOL audits. So, let's jump into our seasonal employers and hiring. What's a seasonal employer? So Maine is a state that has lots of businesses that consider themselves seasonal, though very few of them are. Maine Department of Labor's definition is an employer who operates in an industry customarily open only during a recurring period less than 26 weeks per calendar year. Examples: apple harvesting, campgrounds, ski resorts, summer camps. Seasonal worker, an employee who works temporarily around the specific season. So students, teachers, and a worker who followed, destination seasons for various types of employment. Most Maine hospitality, retail, and landscape businesses are not officially seasonal under Maine law. They are year-round employers who hire seasonal staff. Different rules apply there. Seasonal does not mean 1099. Seasonal workers are W-2 employees. And again, things we always want to talk to people about, hiring seasonal workers can put you into different compliance thresholds. So if you have 9 year-round employees, you add two seasonal workers, now you have 11. Things like earned paid leave start to kick in other state of Maine requirements. Labor laws for seasonal employers, things that are always required. Minimum wage and overtime for everyone that's a W-2 worker. Um, Always an I-9. Workers' comp insurance. If you have one employee or more, that workers' comp needs to be there. Paid family medical leave. That begins on day one of employment. Unemployment insurance filing, anti-discrimination and harassment protections, and those required breaks for both meal and rest, 30 minutes after 6 consecutive hours of work. So threshold-based seasonal workers count for this stuff too. 5+ employees, merit kicks in. 11+ employees, we get into earned paid leave. 10+ employees, 120 days. We have our report to work law. PFML kicks in there. FMLA, and then get to 100+ employees, the Maine severance pay law kicks in there as well. Let's not forget about our common ownership rules as well. That definitely kicks in here and has an impact too. So some tips for hiring seasonal workers: start early. 6 months, 12 months out. For H-2B workers, start the fall prior. For local workers, begin 2 to 3 months before the season really begins. Write targeted job descriptions. Label them as seasonal or temporary. Include start and end dates, what the hours, pay rates, and required skills are. Determine who your target audience is. Target them. Write those job descriptions to really kind of get to them. AI is great at helping write those, whether it's ChatGPT or Claude. They can really help kind of drive that home for you. Be competitive with a lot of things: wages, flexible scheduling, incentive bonuses, beginning of season, end of season type of things. We all know that summer market is incredibly competitive for the worker. Please be sure to follow Maine's ban the box. Don't ask about criminal history in the application. You may ask it during the interview process or the hiring process. If you've had great employees past seasons, invite them back. Find ways to get them to want to come back. Give them a quick refresher on everything. Bring them back. It's great for your team. Just a quick iSolve tip: we love our automated onboarding tools within iSolved. So from I-9 compliance to W-4s, state and federal, the required paid family medical leave notice and handbook acknowledgments can all be done electronically. It makes that process really easy for you to get those people onboarded. So let's talk about some onboarding, best practices. Required paperwork with everybody you hire. Everybody has to complete an I-9. We've got both the state and federal W-4s. That PFML written notice, it's required at the time of hire as of this year. You have to get a social security number. And again, foreign workers, they're going to have to apply for those. And, a copy of the visa documents for foreign workers as well. Best practices kind of just all around: employee handbook, signed and acknowledged, direct deposit authorization forms. Have your new hires sign those job descriptions as well. Really helps them understand what their role is and what the expectations of them are. Safety procedures. And then again, for your returning workers, re-verify that I-9 if it's over 3 years old. Collect updated W-4s, if they've changed. And again, just a quick record keeping tip reminder: maintain, your complete payroll and personnel records for at least 3 years for every employee. So foreign and teen workers. So Marcus, could you kind of walk us through, these various different types of visas and the different things that we need to be thinking about?
Absolutely. Thanks, Jeff.
Yes.
Yeah, seasonal workforce in Maine and elsewhere, made up of a lot of foreign nationals quite often. Um, and what we have listed here is really the three primary um, visa classifications for seasonal and temporary work. Um, a big one for agricultural labor is H-2A, and that's only for agricultural work. Um, that is, generally going to be one season or another during the year. Um, Pretty strict program as far as Department of Labor compliance, have to offer free housing, generally speaking. And there are, prevailing wage requirements. Um, Another big one is the J1. J1 is for exchange visitors, and it's a category that encompasses a number of subcategories, everything from research scholars and academics to au pairs and nannies. But also, there's a specific program called the J1 Work and Travel, and that allows, generally speaking, foreign students abroad who are in college outside the U.S. can come over to the U.S. for the summer and work for 3 months, and then they get a month to travel. And it's a limited duration, generally only 3 to 4 months, but the compliance burden and the complexity are pretty low because you have sponsor organizations that kind of handle everything from identifying workers to applying for visas and handling all of the key steps along the way. A few of them are listed here. CIEE is a big one in Portland. Some of these other folks operate in Maine, I believe, as well. J1s can really be pretty helpful across industries. Another huge one in Maine is the H-2B, which is similar to the H-2A, both H-2s. H-2Bs are for really anything that's non-agricultural. So we have listed here hospitality, landscaping, construction's another one, seafood, really any industry as long as you can show seasonality. Um, Very competitive. There's a cap every year, and you have to apply every year, and it's always a little bit of a race and a timing crunch, but can be a really, really helpful program. There's really two seasons that it's used for. It's pretty late now, very late now to be looking at H-2Bs for this summer. But now would be the time to be starting for this coming winter, 26 to 27. And then there's always next summer as well. As Jeff said, start early, plan ahead. And yeah, the H-2B program requires that you, as an employer, you test the labor market. You have to advertise the position and demonstrate that there aren't any U.S. workers available. I think we all know that's generally the case in many instances. So not a particularly difficult showing. And yeah, I think I'll leave it there. And we can circle back on any questions folks may have.
Sure, Marcus, we actually do have a question in the chat right now that says,
Okay.
are there different laws for seasonal workers that require a worker's permit, i.e. high school students?
Well, that's a good question. So, not so much an immigration question. So, I believe you're going to have to be 18 to be on a visa and be employed. Generally speaking, to be an H-2A, H-2B, or J-1. For seasonal workers, I mean, let's see, does I solved?
Yeah. So
Yeah,
we can handle all the tracking kind of within iSolve for those permits.
yep.
But I think that, I think the question related to, the seasonal workers that require a worker's permit, I mean, I'm gonna have to say there might be some age requirements that kick in here for some of these industries as well. So uh,
Yeah, there are
but
some age requirements and thresholds, and then I think that during the school year there are hours limitations, of course,
yep.
and I think during the summer those are lifted to some extent. But yeah, there are some different rules that it's important to
And
to
we're
look
gonna
at for
jump in,
compliance.
we're gonna jump into some of those hours restrictions as well. So
Excellent.
all right. So J1 versus an H2B from a payroll and payroll compliance standpoint. So, we've got for a J1, we're looking at, minimum wage, whether it's state or federal. We're going to get into minimum wage here in the state of Maine here in a little bit as well. FICA taxes, and again, federal and state unemployment, exemptions for those. PFML, yes, subject to Maine's paid family medical leave, taxes as well. Overtime, entitled to overtime under Fair Labor Standards. Housing, not required, but many employers do assist with that. Definitely required, training plan documents, and they do get a W-2. The H-2B, if somebody's here with an H-2B visa, we're looking at a prevailing wage, federal minimum wage, or state minimum, whichever the highest applies. Yes, we are still looking at FICA taxes. Employer is paying the federal and state unemployment in this case. Yes, for PFML, entitled to overtime under FLSA. No requirement to reimburse for housing or provide housing, but must reimburse visa and travel expenses. And we're looking at a W-2 again here. One of the things that we deal a lot with is when folks are hiring people, J1s or H2Bs, for example, they don't have a social security number yet and they want to add them to payroll. Please don't add them to payroll until you have that social security number. And once they're there, we can add them to payroll, retroactively process wages, and correctly calculate all taxes and take care of all the reporting. That social security number is vital to get that process rolling.
Jeff, I
Um,
would add one more,
yes,
if I could, just one more
please.
comment about, you talked about housing not being a requirement for both the J1 and the H2, which is true. What we've been seeing is, practically speaking, it becomes a real issue because if these workers are available and ready to come and work, they need a place to stay, and
Hmm.
sometimes that can be a real barrier. And the employers who are able to assist, or certainly if they can provide housing, that can really help. But at least to be able to point folks in the right direction, help with transportation if the housing has to be at some distance from the employment. It's something that you kind of say, oh, well, we don't have to worry about housing, but sometimes you really do to make everything work.
Oh, for sure. All right, so let's get into child labor laws. So Marcus spoke to this just a minute ago. Workers ages 14 and 15. We'll kind of start there. Yes, work permit required for every job until they're 16. They can work in pretty much anywhere: restaurants, camps, stores, hotel dining rooms, and kitchens. Age 15 plus for those. 7A to 9P during summer vacation. They can work till 7 p.m. during the school year. Maximum 8 hours on non-school days, 40 hours, 40 hours during vacation weeks, maximum 18 hours during the school week, no more than 6 consecutive days of work. And then things change once a younger worker turns 16, 17. They don't have to have a work permit anymore. They can work, different places. Can't work before 7 a.m. on school days, or before 5 a.m. on non-school days. Only until 10:15 p.m. before a school day, midnight on non-school nights, maximum of 10 hours non-school day, 50 hours during vacation week. We have seen folks go through audits related to this. Child labor violations are costly. So if you have questions about, compliance with this, please feel free to reach out. We're happy to help and give you some guidance. But we've seen some pretty hefty fines in the last few years. So tipped employee compliance. This is one of everybody's favorite topics. So we got to start with minimum wage. And yes, the state of Maine has three minimum wages. So the overall minimum wage for the state of Maine is $15.10 an hour. But both Rockland and Portland have their own minimum wages. So Rockland's is $16 an hour. Portland is 16.75. So that's kind of that base minimum wage. So then we get to the tipped hourly wage at 50% or half of whatever that applicable minimum wage is. So overall, throughout the state, 7.55. You get into Portland, it's $8.38 an hour. Overtime calculations and tipped overtime calculations. We give you some examples of how to arrive at those rates within here. But things that we always stress to our clients that we work with that have tipped employees, they have to earn more than $175 a month in tips. Direct wages plus tips must equal at least the full minimum wage for every work week. And, these minimum wages are location based. So, for example, if you're a server in a catering business that's based in Kennebunk, Maine, and you go and do a job in Portland, that prevailing minimum wage in Portland kicks in. It's something that we have to talk to people about all the time. So, if I could stress, a whole lot of things to you today, make sure you're um, kind of managing that minimum wage compliance based on location. So, what counts as a tip in Maine? We have this conversation a lot as well. So, things that do count as tips: voluntary cash left by a customer, credit card tips. Again, those must be paid out in full by the next regular payday. Automatic gratuities added to a check in a standard restaurant setting, that belongs to the employee, and tips recovered through a valid tip pool. Things that don't count as tips: mandatory service charges for, in a private club or banquets. And again, tips paid to managers, supervisors, or owners. Um, Big tip here: the state of Maine differs from the federal. Under Maine law, automatic gratuity added to a standard restaurant check is considered a tip belonging to the employee. Federal law is often different. So definitely pay attention to that distinction. Tip pooling rules. We see all sorts of variations of a tip pool. So I can't tell you, which is best, but we see a lot of different things here. A couple options that we've seen, option A, using a tip credit. Who can participate in that? Tipped service employees only, servers, bartenders, bussers, hosts who regularly receive tips, what the wage requirement is. And yes, it is employer may claim a FICA tip credit for that. Option B, no tip credit. All employees, so everybody, so back of the house too, participate, full wage for everybody, no FICA tip credit. Um, Things that are always, or people that are always prohibited from the tip pool, the employer, so the business owner, managers and supervisors. Even if they performed some form of tip work, a manager is, somebody who is directing, two or more people or has hiring and firing authority. We talk to folks a lot about tips and making sure that they're managing that piece correctly for their business. Again, state of Maine and others are out looking for tip compliance as well. Overtime, another one of our favorite topics, especially when we get to blended overtime, especially if when people work in a setting where they do multiple roles within a business, whether they're a server and a bartender, and maybe they, are a host or a hostess at another time. Um, all those various rates kick in and create a blended rate for that overtime. And we give you lots of examples here of how to arrive at those calculations. Um, the big things I really want to point out here to everybody without reading kind of all the steps that are in here are, for the tipped employees, use full minimum wage to calculate that straight time and blended rate, then convert it back to an actually hourly rate for any type of gross pay. So, this slide will be included in the deck when it gets posted to everybody for everybody. So definitely take some time and take a look at this. And if you have any questions, you're always welcome to reach out to us. One big beautiful bill. So big topics that we've seen from people. People think, oh my gosh, I'm not going to be taxed on my tips anymore. I'm not going to be taxed on overtime. But there's some clarifications around that as well. So eligible employees can deduct up to $25,000 in tip income per year from their federal income taxes. Again, that gets doubled for married couples. You can also do the same thing for overtime for joint filers, $12,500 in overtime pay per year. Again, it applies only to the overtime premium amounts. Both credits only apply to employees earning less than $150,000 as an individual or $300,000 jointly. Tips and overtime are still subject to FICA and state taxes. Employers must continue withholding normally. It's not an exemption from payroll withholding. We have seen folks who, when the one big beautiful bill is passed, they just stopped reporting tips. Thought that it was going to be tax exempt. They were doing some tracking on their own. It did create some reporting and some accounting issues for themselves as well. The new W-2 form has reporting codes that are required in there, box 12, code TT, total qualified overtime premium, and box 12, code TP, total qualified tips received. And again, service charges do not qualify as tips under the law. Employers must track qualified tips and overtime separately in payroll for accurate year-end in W-2 reporting. iSolve can do this for you, and we're doing it for our clients. So, Department of Labor readiness and kind of what they look for. We have done a couple webinars on this topic in the last several years, and we kind of have broken this down into kind of 6 big boxes for everybody. Employee classifications really focus on exempt versus non-exempt folks, W-2s versus 1099s. Again, seasonal people are not contractors, and accurate current job descriptions on file for everybody. Record keeping, 3 years, employee names, socials, addresses, occupation, and birth dates. If you're using, a payroll service bureau as your payroll vendor, we're tracking all of that for you. Definitely want to track those hours worked each day in the work week, regular overtime earnings, what the deductions were, and time records for everybody in case that is questioned. So time records, that can be in your point of sale system, which is what a lot of folks would do to track time, or it can be through your payroll service bureau's timekeeping tools. Wage and hour compliance, minimum wage paid for every hour worked, overtime calculations, blended overtime calculations, tipped overtime calculated for from full minimum wage, child labor, work permits on file. So again, keeping those work permits on file within iSolved, we can track those electronically for you, making sure schedules comply with hours restrictions. Minors not assigned to do hazardous duty. So please keep in mind the tasks that you're asking those folks to do. Tipped employee records, tip credit taken only during tip producing or directly supporting that work. Tip pooling arrangements, make sure that tip pool is documented and keep the managers and supervisors kind of excluded from that tip pool. If back wages are found, they're going to ask you to pay the gross back wages plus potential liquidated damages, which is generally 2 times. There are civil penalties. They're going to want you to submit proof of payment via specific forms and canceled checks. They want to see checks for these. They want it paid by a payroll check, generally not as a direct deposit. And again, report on the employee W-2. Again, the best defense here is be organized, have a good payroll system, have good policies and procedures in place, and make sure you're sticking to those policies and procedures. And as the rules and the laws change, make sure you keep everything up to date and keep it all compliant. So just a quick kind of summer compliance readiness checklist. Get that PFML written notification in all your offer letters. Verify all employees are properly classified as W-2 and not 1099 folks. Register for merit. So the Maine Retirement Investment Trust. So that is the retirement requirement here in the state of Maine. Before employees hit 120 calendar days on the job, check your headcount thresholds. Again, 5, 10, 15. Pay attention to how many employees you have and the compliance requirements of those. Update any earned paid leave policies for carryover changes. Train your managers on the new report to work law. Document shift changes and notification attempts. Confirm your blended overtime is configured correctly in your payroll system. We spend a lot of time on that. Document tip pooling policies. Confirm that your managers and supervisors are outside of that pool. And if you hire J-1s or H-2B workers, ensure payroll taxes are set up correctly for each visa type. Something we do have is we have some quick reference cards here that we make available to our clients that kind of break down the tax requirements for the different type of worker, whether it's a J1, H2B, H2A. We're always happy to send those out. And if you're a Paper Trails client, just reach out to your payroll processor and we can get those to you. So that's the end. And we'll give a couple minutes here for people to put some questions here in the Q&A. But just always want to give a plug for having people register for our next webinar, how to manage all types of employee leave in today's regulatory environment. So that's coming up in May, and you can register right on our website, papertrails.com/webinars. You'll also be seeing some announcements that our marketing director, John Portanova, is great at putting out there. So we have a question. How should cash tips given to catering manager for staff be reported or tracked? Should I be giving those cash tips directly to employees? Well, I think you're going to have to take a look at what your policy is around that, see what it looks like. And if you have questions, I would say definitely reach out to your payroll service provider to see how they can assist you. And if you're a Paper Trails client, you can feel free to reach out to me directly, or you can reach out to your payroll processor and I'll help you through it. Let's see, we have another question here too. Is there a past webinar I could watch that's an overall on how Paper Trails iSolved as someone who will be working closely with it? Thank you. We do. We have some out there right on our website. Every webinar is recorded. We also spend a lot of time teaching people, how to effectively use iSolved. We have one that's called Getting the Ferrari Out of First Gear. So you can see how that system works and, everything you can get from it. All right, Chris. I have questions about concurrent employment regarding H-2Bs. Do you have information about this? How does this work from each employer? I'm going to tell you, I am not the best person to answer this question, but Marcus, do you have any thoughts on that?
Sure. Yeah, concurrent employment for H-2Bs is a great option because sometimes you might have a labor certification from the Department of Labor for H-2 employment, but you can't find any workers, or the cap was reached before you got your labor cert. So concurrent employment allows you to um, piggyback on somebody else's H-2B. So all H-2B workers are authorized only for a specific employer that petitioned for them. So if you have um, employer A employing a worker at a hotel, um, that's going to be a full-time gig, at least 35 hours a week in H-2B status. And then if you, as another H-2 employer, you have a labor certification, what you could do is actually file a petition on behalf of that same worker, um, and ask for them to have concurrent H-2B employment with you as employer B. And as long as you have you're also offering full-time employment, 35 hours plus, and you can show that the ability to work both schedules, so that both employers will have their full amount of employment. Then that can be done, and that's a way of getting around the cap. Um, I've heard some folks say, concurrent employment isn't really a thing because employees don't want to work that much. Absolutely not true. These folks are here to work. They love to be able to get those kinds of hours, and a lot of times we see employers, looking to hire somebody who's in H-2B status with another employer, and that's not really allowed. It's clearly, your work, just because somebody's in H-2B status doesn't mean they're authorized to work for any employer. Um, so, yeah, it's a helpful strategy in many instances, and we've had many clients use it.
Thank you so much, Marcus. Stephanie, I'm going to reach out to you after the webinar and answer your question about merit for you. So you'll hear from me after. We have another question says, do you have to waive merit if you are an employer that offers a retirement plan? So when the retirement mandate came out, the Maine Retirement Investment Trust asked, kind of not necessarily asked, but required that every employer in the state of Maine notify them if they have an eligible retirement plan. So a simple IRA or 401k, 403b, or if they were going to enroll in the state-run Roth plan. If you've done that, you've done everything you need to do. If you've not notified Merit that you have an eligible plan, you will need to do so. You can do that right on their website. We have heard rumblings for a while now that Merit will start to send out some fines for people that are not registered or are not participating or are not complying with the law. We've not seen this. We've not seen this happen yet. But definitely make sure you are registered with the state for that. Okay. If there are any requirements besides updated minimum wage updates for returning seasonal workers for salary increases, also with the new PFML, if we have seasonal employees who work for a few months and come back and work again within the same calendar year. So, the minimum wage requirements, the salary requirements, you always have to make sure you are complying with that. And PFML, it's tax, so it's going to apply and it's going to need to be collected as they are working. We're looking for ways to further compensate the back of the house, but can't add them to the tip pool, correct? Because, we can't lose the tipped employee rate. Can we do a service fee? Are there laws about other service fees? Um, yes. I think every state's a little bit different. What I would do is, definitely reach out to your payroll service provider and see how they can help you with that and give you some good feedback on that. Well, with that, I think we've answered all of our questions. Thank you everybody for joining us today. Marcus, thank you so much. It was a pleasure having you here and, having your expertise. So
But
we'll see everybody again on Tuesday, May 19th for our next webinar. Thank you, everybody.